So today I'm joined by Jonathan Pageau. A lot of people say hello, Jonathan, so we can see your face.
Hello, everybody.
Great. I guess a lot of people watching this will know who you are already. You've done quite a few public events with Jordan Peterson already, and yeah, you actually reached out to me to talk about the value of organized religion, and it's something I don't have any sort of firm views on, so it'd be a really interesting subject to explore. But I'd love to start by talking about the recent Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson debates, because I know you've been quite vocal about your view of how those have gone and whether they've actually achieved anything. And given that they're sort of fairly recent, I think that would be a good place to start, and then move on to kind of our personal histories with Christianity, the value of organized religion, and then sort of maybe unpacking a few of these questions around the kind of ambivalence of Jordan Peterson's reawakening or re-understanding of some of the Christian tradition, and then that relation to the organized church and whether, that I sort of sense some tensions there that I'm kind of interested to explore.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for agreeing to talk with me. I've been kind of following the videos on and off. I saw the first video. I remember when I saw your first video, your first interview with Jordan, and then I kind of had a little negative reaction to your video. But then I've been following your discussion, and I saw the video with Paul, and I've been seeing kind of your interpretation of things, and I felt like you really do have this kind of desire to enter into the discussion and to figure out what's happening, maybe like just what is going on, because obviously something is happening. And there aren't that many people trying to figure out what the size of this thing that's happening and kind of what the ramifications. And so I really appreciated your desire to kind of take it on and engage. And so I thought, it would be great to have a direct discussion with you. So thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Just I remember what that was. It was the Gnosticism line.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd love to explore. My friend and colleague Ali is an expert on Gnosticism, or researched it quite a lot for a few books. I won't call him an expert, but he's a novelist and researched it quite a lot. So he'd love to have a conversation with you at some point about Gnosticism. I know
sure. I would love to do that too. Like I think for sure it is for sure. I do have a Christian perspective on Gnosticism, and sometimes let's say the Christian perspective on Gnosticism is polemical. That's for sure. And so I kind of understand that, and so I would be happy to talk with somebody who studied it more and kind of duke it out and have that discussion. It'd be great to do that.
Great, cool. You've said a few really exciting things there that I want to just question. I mean, you talked about this thing that's happening, and I think there's a lot of, what I sense on a sort of broad scale is there is a kind of intellectual awakening facilitated by the internet and the kind of the new media, the ability to go down as many rabbit holes as we want.
Yeah.
But how would you summarize it?
I think so. I think what's going on, I think there's also something that's going on. It's that we've kind of reached the end of a certain cycle, or we reached the end of a certain time where we kind of moved into a kind of nihilism, in terms of everybody, all they wanted was to have the nice car and to have, a kind of superficiality. And we saw that in the news and in the way that we've been fed media for the past 10, 20 years, where we've been told how our attention span is shrinking, and we need to have these 10-minute bits and then advertisements, and so we can see it on TV still. Like, it still has that model where they have these little short tidbits of things that they present you, and then they kind of move from one thing to the next. And I think that what we're seeing is we've just reached the end of that, because that's just not true. That's what human beings are. We're not like that. And so it's actually pushing us in a direct, it's like, you could say something like, everybody likes to eat chocolate cake. And if you give someone chocolate cake, like, they'll love it, obviously, and they'll want to have more. But if you eat chocolate cake for 2 days, at some point you just get totally saturated and you want to have some veggies. And I think that's where we are, is that the media companies thought that they could just give us this candy forever. But at some point, people just got completely fed up, and now they're looking for something a bit deeper and a bit more intense, and they're not getting it from the universities. For anybody who studied in university, it's so ideological, especially in the humanities. It's so ideological. There's so little room for actual engagement and actual discussion, actual plunging into the text of Western history, that people are looking for it on the internet. And luckily we have some interesting people that are kind of coming up, I think. And I think that Jordan Peterson has been someone who's kind of filled that place. But there are some people that don't have as much following as Jordan, but you'll find philosophers online that have, 50,000 followers, and their lectures have, 50,000 views on this like obtuse concept in Heidegger, or like, reading Hegel, and it's like they have 50,000 views, which is just insane. It means that people are really hungry for something more than just the Kardashians,
Yeah. And do you tie the Sam Harris Jordan Peterson debates in any way to that sort of the changing of worldviews or the changing of different perspectives? Because I mean, Harris is obviously the foremost advocate for the materialist paradigm, which I at least would sort of say is partly what has led to the sense of a lack of felt meaning in people's lives.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a great line. Sorry, I'll just.
Go ahead.
There's a great line that a friend of mine came up with recently, which was, he said, "Scientism is worse than jihadism because jihadism doesn't create nuclear weapons."
Yeah, exactly. That's hilarious. Yeah, there is a kind of, I think that it's interesting to see it kind of from the outside, is to see in a lot of the this kind of new atheist bunch, a kind of blindness and a kind of certainty, which you actually do discover in Jehovah's Witnesses, for example. Like this kind of absolute certainty of what they're doing, and also a proselytizing, where they just kind of want to convince you of their thing. And so it's really funny to see that, but it is kind of frightening to think, like you said, that behind Jehovah's Witnesses, all you have are really annoying conversations at the door. But behind scientism, you have artificial intelligence. You have all these things, like the transhumanists, for example. I mean, it's frightening how they don't have wisdom to kind of understand the propositions that they're making. This idea of putting, let's say, electronic devices in the brain to increase people's thinking. And Sam Harris is for some of that stuff. And so it's like they don't seem to understand the basic wisdom of humanity, that how that would be problematic. They don't seem to be able to see what that is. But I think it's interesting. It's been really interesting. At first, when Jordan was trying to kind of engage with Sam Harris, I didn't totally understand why he was so adamant about doing so, because Jordan really did want to have this discussion with him. I was actually at Jordan's house at the second discussion that Jordan had with Sam Harris. The first one was the horrible one, the 2-hour like train wreck. The second one wasn't so bad. And I was actually at his house, and we went over like the first Sam Harris debate with his son and Jordan. We listened to the whole thing. Then we kind of analyzed it. Where did it go wrong and everything. So Jordan is really adamant about Sam. And I kept wondering why him? And I think I know what it is. I think because there is something in Sam Harris which represents a beginning of a transition. It's there in him because of all the new atheist types. He has had spiritual experiences, and he can't discount them. Like, he can't pretend like those are meaningless. He knows how meaningful they are. And because of that, he does have a desire to recover something of spiritual tradition. It's just that he still has, it's like he's kind of has a one foot in two worlds, and he's trying to figure it out. It's as if Jordan also has his foot in two worlds, right? Jordan isn't totally on the religious side or on the scientific side. It's just that, so they both have their foot in two worlds. It's just that maybe one is pulling more on one side and the other is kind of pulling more on the other. One is saying there is value, there's more value than you think in the religious aspect. And the other is saying there's very little value in the religious thing. The only thing that's worthy is the discussions about consciousness and especially Eastern or mystical experiences. Like, that's all that matters. And so I think that's why the discussion has been so engaging for people, or people have been so wanting to follow it, because I think people are trying to figure that out. They're trying to understand how, because I think most people do have an intuitive sense that there's more. Like there's an intuitive sense that there's something about our being in the world which has meaning, which is, and you have to actually work really hard to destroy that, to just be and most people who do that, they actually are deluding themselves, because they say that they're just monkeys, you know, and they're just a bunch of monkeys who are saying things. But if you pay attention just a little while to what they're saying, you realize that it's not true. They have hierarchies of values. They have spirits to which they pray. They don't even know that they're praying to certain gods, but they're at the altar of certain gods, and they're sometimes being possessed by those spirits, you know. And so anyway, so that's why I think it's been so interesting for people to follow this, because I think that's the discussion that people want to hear now, because we're in a moment where we have a loss of meaning. Everybody's experiencing it. Like there's a kind of chaos of meaning, a chaos of identity, a sense that things are crumbling, or we're not connected anymore together. We live in our little suburban homes. We don't know our neighbors. We don't have community. So all of that is real, and people are looking for solutions to that. And the discussion between Jordan and Sam is taking people just like one little step at a time towards figuring out what that means, even in terms of translating it in a way that people who are kind of scientifically minded could understand.
Yeah, do you have a sense of, because I guess both of us share a sense that we think Peterson has a bigger perspective on this than Sam Harris. And how do you sense that those debates have gone? I mean, and do you have a sense of what would need to shift for Sam to appreciate, for example, the fact that values have to be rooted in a story, for example? I'd say the fundamental disagreements between them are pretty much that, aren't they? That values have to be, they can't be derived rationally, and they have to actually be more deep rooted than that.
Yeah. I think that it's funny because at the end of the London discussion, it's Sam who started to talk about consciousness. It's like towards the end of the discussion. And I felt like, this is the place. This is the spot where the next step of the discussion needs to happen. The thing is that Jordan hasn't studied a lot, let's say, in terms of Eastern tradition, in terms of Buddhism, and also even in terms of Christianity, he hasn't studied the mystical tradition so much. And so the idea of not just having a spiritual vision, let's say, but actually elevating your consciousness, as we say, or transforming your consciousness to become more, to be freer, to be less bound by our multiplicities, less bound by our passions, all that stuff that is in the mystical tradition. I think that that's the key for Sam. That's the discussion that is going to help him break his, the way that he sees some of this stuff. Like what I would like to have, like if I had a discussion with Sam Harris, I would just say, okay, look, I know you don't like religion. I'm religious. That's fine. Let's not talk about that because it's going to be a dead end. Let's talk about consciousness. Let's talk about that and let's lay it out. Okay. What does a world in which consciousness is central, how does it lay itself out? How does attention lay itself out? Right? It lays itself out in terms of hierarchies. In terms of hierarchies, you have a point of attention, and then around that point, the world kind of flows out into chaos, which is on the edge. Even in your visual frame, that's how it works, right? So you have points of attention, and then on the edges you have this chaotic space, which is kind of gray and not totally there. And so you say, okay, so now let's take that experience of consciousness, and let's say that that's the foundation of reality. That's what he says. He says that's the foundation of reality. Well, is there an analog to that in a community? What does that look like? What does the analog of consciousness in a community look like? It looks like gathering together around a point, looks like turning around a point. It's circumambulation. It's a hierarchy of social, of structure. And it ends up looking like a religious ritual. That's what it looks like, right? Because religious rituals have the same structure as the structure of consciousness. So I think and then what does that look like in time? what does the experience of consciousness look like if you see it with the frame of time? And what it looks like is a story. It's the same. And so I think that would be the work that I think could kind of help Sam Harris move a little bit further down the road. I don't know. He's actually also, his whole world is, his whole career, everything about him is caught up in his position. And so I don't know if he'd be willing to make that move. I thought the debates themselves were very frustrating. I thought they were useful in the sense that I thought that Jordan had a chance to say what he wanted to say. And I think that people in the audience, people are going to be listening to it. Some of them are going to be willing to make the work, to do the work. Some of the schemes that he laid out, like the scheme of human sacrifice, I thought was like, if you're honest and you're honestly attentive to what he's saying, you will see how strong what he's laying out is and how evolutionary correct, like in terms of just evolutionary thinking, how correct what he's laying out is. And so I think that some of the viewers will probably be willing to make the work. I don't know. But for Sam, I think consciousness, I don't know. I think he was going to do an interview with Don Hoffman. I don't know if he did it, but I think that someone like Don Hoffman could help Sam kind of move forward. Like Don Hoffman, I don't know if you know about him. Did you follow that?
No, I don't.
So
I just want to, what it sounds like you're talking about is the phenomenology of consciousness.
Yeah.
You're sort of basically saying this is the way that you try and argue with Sam Harris with the phenomenology of consciousness. What does it look like?
Because that's what he says is the basis of reality. And the thing is that the phenomenology of consciousness doesn't actually transfer easily into scientific thinking. It's actually, scientific thinking is actually quite far from phenomenological consciousness. Phenomenological consciousness actually looks way more like a very primitive vision of the world, where there's up, there's down, and your whole experience is there to tell you when you're up and down, because when your head is upside down, you don't feel right, you don't feel right. And so your whole body and your whole experience is there to experience heaven and earth. It is there to experience time, and is there to experience also limited attention, and then a hierarchy of attention. And that's how we set up our communities. Everything's set up that way. So I would kind of move through that with him to get him to understand what these stories are about. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. Like my brother Mathieu, he wrote a book on cosmic symbolism in Genesis, and that's exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to bring it back to consciousness and show you how the structures in Genesis, the stories are basically, that's what they're talking about. In the story in Genesis, the creation story, it's obvious that that's what it's talking about, at least in part. I mean, you have the use of word, you have this notion of opening your eyes and then being self-aware and then actually covering yourself to protect yourself from the outer world. It's like the whole story of the fall, it's obviously talking about consciousness. That's what it is. It's a being who acquires a certain type of consciousness, and then the effects of that consciousness on that being. I don't see how you can't see it. It's obvious that that's what it's about. Anyways.
Yeah, it's. I think you also spoke to that. It's very hard once someone has established a position, written a lot of books on a certain perspective, to go through an experience of having to change their minds. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I think so
as well.
But I think that it's not. I don't think it's not impossible. In a way, Sam is also someone who is honest. He has these weird patterns that he falls into. And it's like Jordan was talking about. I mean, he laid out this amazing discussion about this notion of a mimetic process by which we identify the ideal man, the ideal human, and then we project this ideal human and we represent him in the dome of a church in the heaven, right, of your experience. And then we look up together towards that mimetic representation, and then we see it as the model by which we live our lives. And then Sam Harris is like, yeah, but what about fundamentalists? And it's like, that's all he could say was, what about fundamentalists? What about, it's like, this discussion is not moving forward. It's not, and you could do this with anything. You could do that with anything. And I love when Jordan said, do it. Take the Buddhist stories. Do it. Do it with the Hindu stories. Please, Sam, do it. If you say that you can do it with anything, do it. Maybe it'll give you some insight into how these stories work and how this stuff works. And it's not, that it's not all arbitrary, and it's not just a bunch of stories we tell each other. You can't escape, even if you enter into an evolutionary way of thinking, you can't escape it. Everything you do has to be within that. So our stories have to be part of it. Our concepts have to be part of it. Everything has to be part of it. You can't just discount an aspect of humanity as if it doesn't matter, because that means you're not trying to understand what it means, what it is to be human. You can't just say it's silly. Well, you have to be able, it's there. You have to be able to talk about it, because that's also part of the let's say the emergent phenomena. Like, you have to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, and it also speaks to that paradox that Peterson points out about, you can either be an evolutionary thinker or you can be an atheist. He doesn't see how those two things fit together. Or at least you have to admit that religion has something this long-lasting and powerful must have some evolutionary benefit.
Yeah, and also the idea that, for example, that we want to discount irrationality, that we want to be rational, it's like, okay, well, then you're not taking into account the fact that we're irrational. I mean, we are obviously irrational too. Like, it's obvious that we are, and so there are reasons, there are purposes for our irrationality. It's not like irrationality contains the entire scope of human experience. So if you want to say that you can only filter the world through rationality, then you're definitely creating something which is going to be lopsided. And what I think, and what Jordan thinks, is that it's going to create a totalitarian result, because you're unaware, like, you're totally unaware of what the that other aspect of ourselves is. So yeah, so it's a very strange.
Trying to turn the light on, which there we go. I've run around the room to get the light back on, but I've done it. Yeah, this is something I've heard. I think in those debates, Sam calling what Jordan believes dangerous quite a few times. Maybe I haven't heard enough of it. Does Jordan describe what Harris believes is dangerous as well, or is it kind of a one-sided discussion on that front?
I think that it's interesting, because I think Jordan. Okay, so Sam's retort to Jordan is that, all the horrors of the 20th century and let's say the late 19th and early 20th century, those were still religious thinking that we're continuing, and I think that's where Jordan kind of, he once in a while he'll give like a thing, okay, talk about Mao and Stalin, and then Sam's retort is, no, that's still religion. And I think that Jordan hasn't totally figured out a way to kind of move past that without starting to argue. And I don't think he wants to argue. But I think that Sam, because Sam, it was so funny the way he dealt with that in that discussion where Jordan brought that up, and Sam said, I'm going to deal with this because I'm sick of hearing this argument. Like, I'm sick of hearing it, and I'm going to deal with it once and for all. Then he said something like, he said what you would expect. No, that's still religion. But it's like, I'm not convinced, my buddy. I'm not convinced at all, because it was already there in the French Revolution. All that was already there in the French Revolution at a smaller scale, but we're talking about tens of thousands and maybe up to a few 100,000 people that were slaughtered because of reason. Like, they clearly said that the motivating factor behind their action was reason, science, progress. That's exactly what they said. And they even had the cult of reason, where they destroyed all the church. They would empty out the churches, and they used the church building to celebrate reason. And so they would all get together and celebrate reason. And that happened in the blood of the peasants. Like, that happened soaking in Catholic blood. So I think that that's kind of it's a frustrating thing. And I think I also think that's what makes Sam's position dangerous, is because he thinks that he is innocent. He thinks that he's innocent and that his position is only innocent. He always says something like, atheism just means the belief in no God. There is no positive aspect to atheism. Now we want to propose, after that, let's leave that aside. Now we want to propose some positive things. And he's in the position where he can say, well, what I propose has never been tried. It doesn't exist. And so, it's so beautiful. Look at how beautiful what I'm proposing is. And he can't understand the side effects of what he's proposing. Can't understand how, when you do something, you don't necessarily know the ramifications on the side. And so he complains, let's say, about North American nihilism and their obsession with their cars and with celebrities, but then he somehow sees that as negative, but then he wants a secular society. It's like, well, maybe a secular society gives that, because that's what happened. And the other alternative to that, to like the kind of mall going fat, diabetes, like maybe the only opposite to that is to anchor yourself in something like reason or nation or something lower on the hierarchy, and then becoming an ideologue, and then just going and destroying churches, or killing whatever group that is going to be killed because he's not part of your thing. So anyways, I've said this in the discussion before, I don't think Sam Harris is the one who would go out and burn churches. Obviously not. It would be more like the Varg type, like Varg would take the atheism to go and destroy churches. It wouldn't be Sam, but in the wake of what he's proposing, that's what's going to happen. I can't see anything besides that.